Alrighty. Okay, I'll just make sure I have got volume. Now, this is being recorded, so if you do not want your beautiful faces on the recording, you just need to turn your cameras off. If you don't mind, please leave them on. It's always nice to see faces. In saying that, I'm more than happy for you to turn them off as well. I'm very used to running webinars with no one with their cameras on. That is absolutely no problem at all. Okay. It's going to be a bit of a process as I admit people. I am notorious, I can't even say it. I am notoriously bad at trying to do two things at once. So I will do my very, very best to pay attention to who's coming into the waiting room and admit you as you arrive. So I'm just going to put a chat here. That's a waiting room, meeting group chat. All right, so there, I've just started a chat. Hopefully, you can all see that. If you do have questions, please feel free to pop any questions into the chat. I will do my best to answer them. If I'm not sure of the answer, I will very happily say, I don't know, and I will get back to you on the question. Just to be really clear, I'm an exercise scientist, so my research is in exercise and cognition. So when it comes to things like pharmaceuticals, when it comes to diagnosis, I can give you an opinion based on what I know, if I know something. But generally speaking, when it comes to things around diagnosis and medication, that is a conversation you should be having with your GPs, geriatrician, psychiatrist, psychologist, whoever is a part of your
In
healthcare
the
team.
volume on your keypad.
All right, someone
Mhm.
is not muted. Let me find who that is. So just make sure you're, there we go. Just make sure you stay muted where possible. If you do want to ask a question, I'm more than happy for you to ask the question by unmuting yourself as well. Otherwise, just pop it into the chat and I will answer that when I see it. Okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Alrighty, can everybody see that PowerPoint? If you can't, just pop something into the chat so I can fix that. I'm just going to work out where my chat box has gone. There it is. Okay, lovely. Thanks, Warren. Okay. So what we'll do is we will get started. Just going to move a few things around on my screen. I'm working off my laptop. And it is little. I've been kicked out of my I got kicked out of my office by my eldest. He's now vacated the property, so I've now just got to go back into my office, but haven't quite made it there at the moment. So currently hiding in my twins' bedroom, sitting under their loft bed. So if anyone walks in, we'll just ignore them and keep going. All right, so tonight what we are going to be covering is I think the most important thing to talk about is what risk actually is, because I think there's a lot of fear around whether or not you're going to end up with dementia. And I think that that fear is in part perpetuated by the media. I think the media does a really great job of getting us to read things, getting us to pay attention to their news article or whatever. And we do that with exaggerated claims. It is no claim, it is not an outlandish or exaggerated claim that dementia is the leading cause of death. It has been the leading cause of death in Australia since 2024. It has been the leading cause of death in women since 2016. So, for the last 10 years, dementia has been the leading cause of death in Australian women. I find it incredibly frustrating that that is not better known, and it hasn't been until it's become the overall leading cause of death that it is getting more airtime. I'm very glad that it is. Better late than never. But we want to talk about risk first, and I want to try and put it into context so that you can understand really what that risk looks like, what that means for you, and then also what you can do about it. We'll also have a quick talk about what dementia is, the different types, that occur, like the major types. We will talk about risk factors that you cannot change. We will discuss genetics in amongst that. And then, really importantly, we're going to spend some time on the 14 modifiable risk factors. And these are the things that we absolutely have control over to a degree. And you'll understand why I mean to a degree when we get there. Things that you can do. And then, if you have any questions, I will answer as many of those as I can at the end. Alrighty. So let's talk about what risk actually means. And if you do any amount of reading, of research, or spend any time listening to academics, they will often talk about risk. And if you read the media or see anything in the media, they will always use big headline grabbers. So they'll say, your risk for dementia doubles if you do XYZ. And you're like, oh my goodness, my risk is doubling. But what you need to know is, what is your base rate? If your initial risk is super duper low, let's just say your initial risk is only 1%. If your risk or your initial risk is 1%, then if it doubles, you're now at 2%, which is still very, very small. And when I look at some of the headlines that get published and I look at the studies, and the study headlines are, things like your risk doubles if you don't get enough sleep at night, or whatever it is. And I go and look at what the absolute or what that baseline risk is. Sometimes we're talking, it's like 0.05. Like, that's how low the percentage is. So it's 0.05% risk that you started off with. And yes, it did double, but that's 0.1%. So the media, unfortunately, do a really good job of giving you accurate information without any kind of context. So if we look at our lifetime absolute risk of getting dementia, it's about 14%. So approximately, and it varies by population and it also varies by sex. Women are more likely to get dementia, and there's two main reasons why that is. The first one is because we just live longer, and that's just a simple fact. The number one risk factor for the development of dementia is your age. As we get older, our risk increases. We have a higher and higher chance of getting it. So age is just a risk factor. Women tend to live longer. Another reason why, and this is being investigated at the moment, and it is to do with estrogen levels and menopause. However, I really hate the way the media frames menopause like it is a disease, like it is that it's women have always gone through menopause. It is a transition. And yes, the transition can be a little bit rougher on others than some. I know that menopause was quite difficult for mum. Uh, she used to. I was a bit of a problematic human being when I was younger. My husband would say I'm still problematic. But my mum would often say that I put her into early menopause. And look, I may have. The stress that I put her under may have actually done that. But she went through menopause for quite a long time, at least 10 years. She was having hot flushes for a really long time. So there is something in menopause and dementia risk. However, this is an emerging area of research, and it's certainly, there's no well-established data at this point. Early menopause and dementia risk, there does seem to be an association, but that's early onset menopause. And again, it's just risk. There's a relationship there. And if you go into early menopause, maybe there are other things also going on in your life that are increasing your risk for dementia. And that's something that I really want to highlight right now. It is never just one thing. It is not just one thing that tips you over the edge. It is a combination of risk factors. And if we look at any disease, the way in which we develop chronic conditions, so if we're looking at things like, so I should say not any disease, but chronic conditions, it is a combination of genetic susceptibility, it is our lifestyle, and it is our environment. So, for example, for myself with the Hashimoto's, I obviously had a genetic susceptibility to it, and then my stress levels absolutely tipped me over the edge. I was already very stressed, and then I opened a gym, and that tipped my stress levels into unmanageable. And then I continued to have very high stress levels for a number of years. That was so it was environment, it was genetic susceptibility, and then there was probably a few other things in there where I wasn't maybe looking after myself in the right way as well in terms of sleep and exercise and whatnot. And that might have also contributed to it. But if we think about risk here, if we go back to this slide, your lifetime risk is about 14%, remembering varying by population and sex. So, you know, the absolute risk for getting dementia as a female in Australia is going to be different to the absolute risk for, say, a female living in Africa versus living in Asia. So it does depend on where you're living. So it depends on your population and then also by sex. But let's talk about what that 14% actually means. So let's just think you have a bag of 100 marbles, and in that 100 marbles, you've got 86, which are these blue marbles, and then you've got 14 are these pink marbles. So if you were to reach into that bag, it's not that you won't get a pink marble. It's just that you are more likely to get a blue marble. And this is where those modifiable risk factors really come in. So what we do is we try and work on the things that lower our risk. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to lower how many pink marbles we have in our bag, and consequently increase those blue marbles. It's not that we can completely eliminate the pink ones, but we can certainly lower that. And we're able to do that through getting good sleep, reducing our stress, improving our cognitive reserve or working on our cognitive reserve, through exercise, through diet, through our getting our hearing tested and getting something done about it if we have hearing loss. Same with our vision. So there are definitely things that we can do that can shift those numbers. And when we look at our dementia risk across a lifetime, it's anywhere from like 10 to 20%. So it kind of depends person to person, study to study, population to population, but it is not a fixed number. It is a range, and it is all just about risk. So the next time when you're getting really worried about your dementia risk, I want you to remember that the odds are in your favor. We have 86 blue marbles and then we have 14 pink marbles. So the chances of you picking up a pink marble are much smaller than if you were to pick up a blue marble. So I hope that helps you understand, because I think that this is probably where a lot of people do get a bit concerned and a little bit worried about their dementia risk. But overall, your overall dementia risk is still really quite low. Alrighty. So then thinking about what dementia actually is. So it is not a single disease. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So people tend to think that dementia is one disease or it is a specific type of Alzheimer's or something along those lines. But essentially what it is, it's an umbrella term for a group of symptoms that impact upon your brain that cause neurological symptoms. So as an example, people with dementia often display problems with their memory, with their thinking, with their behavior. For my mum, some of her earliest signs, we actually didn't even realize at the time. She got diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in 2018, but it was probably 4 years before that where she decided that she didn't want to drive the car anymore because she was anxious about driving in the car. And my dad had gone from a smaller car to a medium-sized car, and she thought it was too big, and it worried her. Now, my mum was super smart, switched on, independent. As kids, she just ruled that house. When mum said jump, you said how high. She was fierce, and she didn't need a diary. She didn't need any. She just knew what was going on all the time. And she certainly didn't need anyone holding her hand or taking her places. So for her to make the decision that she didn't want to drive anymore, that should have been a huge red flag for us. Unfortunately, hindsight is a beautiful thing. And then it was a few years later that she was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. And interestingly, I had people coming up to me since mum has died and has said to me that they noticed that she was having problems with memory before that even. And I thought that was surprising that I didn't even know about that. I certainly hadn't noticed that mum had problems with memory or with driving. However, I also had three very small children, and I was quite busy. I had four children, three of whom were under the age of 18 months. So my life was really quite busy, and I may not have been really aware of what was going on. I did notice that mum was having some behavioral things. She was quite angry, and I had sort of commented on that. But as I said, hindsight's a beautiful thing. My mum had Alzheimer's disease, so for her it was spatial awareness, it was memory, and then there was some behavioral changes. With vascular often comes with behavioral changes as well, as does the frontotemporal dementia. And then Lewy body tends to cause hallucinations, and then you have problems with movement. So each of these have their own symptoms. They will often come with specific medications relating to those symptoms. With things like vascular dementia, oftentimes people will be on medications relating to cardiovascular health. So they might be taking a blood pressure medication. They could be taking cholesterol medication. They may also be on medication to help manage their blood glucose levels. So depending on what the type of dementia is, will depend on what medication they take. It will also then depend on what symptoms they show, and to some extent, then how you will manage that. Because for some people, so as an example with FTD or frontotemporal dementia, oftentimes language is what goes first. So you might end up with primary aphasia. Communication can become very challenging. So if that is your loved one or if that is someone you're working with, knowing or having strategies to be able to communicate with them because they can't speak is really, or they can't speak as well, is really important. Alzheimer's disease, particularly the memory is a real problem. And it could be that when you are with them, you just need to think about ways in which you can remind them of what they've done, or having things around the house that help them remember days, times, all those sorts of things. So it is important to some extent to know what type of dementia they have, because I did see that there was a question about whether or not you should try and identify which one it is. I would say yes, you want to know which one it is. If there is medication specifically that may help manage symptoms and improve quality of life, then definitely yes. If you if the person is okay and they're doing well and going through a process of identifying the type of dementia that they have, and it's going to cause stress and anxiety for them, then you have to weigh that up against the benefit of knowing what type it is, and if there is medication that's going to improve their quality of life. Across the board with dementia, often medications are prescribed for anxiety, depression, to help with mood. So those would be generally prescribed anyway, but if there are specific medications that on top of that may improve their quality of life, then you would consider trying to work out what type, or going through that path of diagnosis. So importantly, and I think this is a good slide for everyone, because we tend to really worry about, is what I'm experiencing normal aging? Is what I am experiencing cognitive impairment? I want to give you an example of a lady who was in my research trial. So when I was doing the follow-up cognitive testing with her, Participants were screened for mild cognitive impairment at baseline, and then 12 months later, the trial finished, and that's when we did the end of trial cognitive testing. And then 12 months after that, I did the follow-up testing. Excuse me. So I did the testing 12 months after the exercise intervention had ended. And when this lady came in, I can remember thinking, how on earth has this woman made it into our cognitive impairment study? She was so switched on. She was very sharp, doing all these things. She'd driven herself to the university, no problem navigating where we were, holding a conversation, no problems with memory. Anyway, as we got talking, she had told me that when she'd first enrolled into the study, her husband had been very unwell, and then sadly, he had subsequently passed away. What it appeared to me was that she had mild cognitive impairment induced by her very stressful emotional environment. And I think that's such an important thing to know, that you can have mild cognitive impairment because of your life, because of a very stressful situation, because of a very emotional situation. When mum passed earlier this year, I absolutely had cognitive impairment. I can remember, uh, honestly, some of it I can't remember properly, but I can remember on the day that she died, I decided at that point it was a really, so she was obviously getting close-ish. So this was the morning of, and then she died 9:30 that night. So this, we're talking about 9 o'clock that morning. I've decided that I should start ringing all the participants who need to be in my clinic at the University of Queensland. I was a clinic coordinator for the mental health, aging, and cancer clinic for the exercise physiology students. And so I'm like, yeah, all right, let's start doing this. Anyway, and I got started with it, and then we realized that like mum was actually starting to deteriorate. And so I quickly stopped what I was doing. But I can remember in that moment just being like, I know that I need to be doing something, but I don't know what I should be doing. And I decided to start calling people. That was such a weird thing for me to do. And then in the days afterwards, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't think. You couldn't get a straight answer out of me. And if I'd had to sit down and do the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, I would have absolutely registered as mild cognitive impairment. In fact, it may have even been worse than that. Some of the tests you have to really concentrate and think about, and you have to tap and you have to recall certain things and words. I actually don't think I would have had the capacity to do that. So it's important to know that cognitive impairment can be brought on because of stress and emotion and your environment. Mild cognitive impairment can also be brought on because of medical conditions. So when I had Hashimoto's, or I still do have Hashimoto's, but when I was going through the diagnosis of Hashimoto's, one of the things that I said to the doctor was, I am really struggling cognitively, finding it very hard to think. So hypothyroidism is known for inducing cognitive impairment. So there are other medical conditions that can cause this. So when you're going through a dementia diagnosis, what the doctor's going to want to do is try and work out why you're having this cognitive impairment and ruling out everything else. You don't want to give someone a dementia diagnosis when really the reason why they're having this cognitive impairment is because some other medical condition or because of something going on in their life. So important to note that mild cognitive impairment is considered to be a intermediary stage between the normal cognitive decline that is associated with aging and then that which meets the fulfillment criteria for dementia. So we've got normal cognitive decline here, and then we've got mild cognitive impairment here. Dementia is then down on the other end. So it's a spectrum. Cognition is a spectrum. Mild cognitive impairment can absolutely be reversed. If the cognitive impairment is not pathogenic or caused by a disease, i.e., dementia, it can be reversed. And research shows that about 40-ish% of people who are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment go on to have normal cognition within a 12-month period. So if you ever do get a cognitive impairment diagnosis, the first thing to do is take a breath and remember that almost half of people who get an MCI diagnosis go back to normal cognitive function within about a year. On the flip side, 5 to 15% of people who get an MCI diagnosis go on to receive a dementia diagnosis within 12 months. Everybody else is then still sort of floating around in that MCI area. So up to half go back to normal cognition. 5 to 15% go on to receive a dementia diagnosis. And here's the other thing. The other half, up to about half, will receive a dementia diagnosis within about 3 years. So really, your MCI can go back to being normal cognition. So about half go back to normal, and then a half go back, or in 3 years, go on to receive that dementia diagnosis. So that does sound a little bit scary, but it just all depends on the way in which you frame it. Lots of people who get that MCI diagnosis never go any further than that. They go back to normal cognition, or they just sort of float around that MCI for a while. And if you're worried about your own cognition, the most important thing to think about is there is a normal amount of cognitive decline associated with aging, but there's so much that we can offset through modifiable lifestyle factors, through things that we can physically do that will offset that cognitive decline. And exercise is certainly one of them. But if you have a look at this list, you can just see what the difference is between, say, having true cognitive impairment versus, just a little bit forgetful. So long as you're not looking at your keys and going, I actually don't even know what these are for, probably what we're experiencing at the moment is a busy life, tiredness, stress, maybe a little lack of sleep. There's lots of things that can interfere with our normal cognitive our normal cognitive function. Okay, so let's then talk about what we cannot change. The first thing that we cannot change is our age, and age is the number one risk factor for dementia. Number one. The older you are, the more likely you are to receive a dementia diagnosis. So once you hit 65, we do see that the risk significantly increases from there. It roughly doubles about every 5 years after the age of 65. However, remembering we're starting from that small base rate, so even if we are seeing that doubling, it still is staying relatively small. And remembering that this always is dependent on the research that it is done on, and remembering the population. There is a lot of dementia risk that is tied up in modifiable risk factors, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Family history does increase your risk for dementia. And part of that is due to genetics. And then I would say but definitely part of that would also be due to the fact that we learn from our parents. We tend to become like them. And so the behaviors, but the lifestyle factors that maybe led a family member to a dementia diagnosis might be something that we also do. So it is important for us to take steps to change our own lives if we come from families where health wasn't prioritized or where healthy habits weren't actively employed. Sex is another one that increases our risk. Partly because of living longer. And then there is some new evidence around some other biological factors, particularly in that estrogen area. And then Down syndrome. People with Down syndrome are much more likely to develop dementia. Okay, there is some risk associated with genetics, but this is what I really, really, really want to focus on for a second, because the media loves a good scare story. Now, the ApoE4 is the most common genetic variant or risk variant for late onset Alzheimer's. So ApoE4. If you have one copy, you've got 2 to 3 times a higher relative risk. But remembering again, we're starting from a really low base. If you have 2 copies, that jumps up 8 to 12 times the higher relative risk. Now, you may or may not have seen, but in the media, that Australian actor Chris Hemsworth got tested, and he found out that he has and the headline was 10 times increased risk for Chris Hemsworth. Now, I mean, the media is not wrong. I mean, yes, technically it's correct, but again, you start from such a small base that that 10 times higher risk or that 8 to 12 times higher risk is still relatively low. And really importantly, 50 to 60% of people with two copies of the ApoE4 gene do not develop Alzheimer's. That's the majority. That is the majority. So, and that's why the heading is genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And I want this to be a real message of empowerment and encouragement to you all that we can't do anything about our genetics. We can't do anything about our age. We can't do anything about our sex. Like that is, it is what it is. But what we can do is we can work on a number of really important risk factors that can help pull that risk or control that risk as much as possible. There are some rare genetic mutations that do increase your risk for the development of early onset Alzheimer's. If you do have someone in your family, a first degree relative who has had early onset, like your mum or your dad, you would need to make a decision about whether genetic counseling is something that you should do. I I am not sure what I would do. If I'm really honest, I'm not sure what I would do. I probably would not want to know because there's nothing you can do about it. So knowing that I had that gene would just ruin my life until I developed it and then I wouldn't know I had it anymore and I wouldn't be so worried. But I probably would not want to know. However, if that is something that you would like to know, and I guess for yourself, if you're worried about, if you're thinking about having children and you're worried about having children and passing it on, you may want to know that. But that is certainly a you decision to make and something that you would talk to your doctor about. Okay, so we know that there are some things we can't modify. We know that genetics play a role, but it's lifestyle. That is the big thing, and we're going to talk about that now. So if you've spent any time in the Healthy Aging Project with me, you will know that 45% of dementia cases globally are associated with 14 modifiable risk factors. Now, really important to understand what that 45% means because in the wrong hands, people think that if they deal with these modifiable risk factors that they have pulled their risks down by 45%. That is not what it means. So the 45% is what's called a population attributable fraction. And essentially what that means is that it is the estimated proportion of dementia cases in our population. So we're at a population level here that are linked to 14 risk factors. So as an example, if and I'll show you on the next slide. So here, sorry, that is really hard to see, and I'm so sorry, but this is how the Lancet Commission has produced this picture, and it's the best way, I think, to look at it. But if we look at hearing loss, so hearing loss has 7% risk associated with it. So if you were to fix your hearing loss, it doesn't mean that you have now reduced your reduced your dementia risk by 7%. What this means is that if we were to able to eliminate hearing loss from the population, we should see a 7% reduction in dementia cases at a population level. So we should see dementia rates come down by 7% if we were to get rid of hearing loss. Same with high LDL cholesterol. If we could eliminate all high LDL cholesterol from the population, dementia cases should come down by 7%. So it's not about being able to reduce your own risk. What it is, this is what happens at a population level. So what does that mean for you then? So these factors are meaningfully contributing to dementia at a population level. Even though it is a population level statistic, what it does actually mean is that if you were to address them in your own life, let's just say hearing loss is a situation for you and you went and addressed it, that will absolutely lower your individual risk. We can't tell you by how much though. We can't take a population level statistic and then apply it to your individual situation. But what we can say to you is taking care of your hearing loss, getting hearing aids, whatever it is that you need to do to improve your hearing, that is absolutely going to reduce your overall dementia risk. So I hope that part makes sense. So across the lifespan, the Lancet Commission into Dementia Prevention identified 14 modifiable risk factors. Interestingly, depending on which model they looked at, so there's another model that included in early life HIV status and poverty, and that increased the percentage to 65%, which I thought was quite staggering. But in this model, lower education or less educational attainment is associated with a 5% population attributable fraction in terms of dementia risk. Now, for all of us watching this this webinar right now, we aren't able to do anything about our early life. Early life has been and gone, but it is important for us to know so that we can then tell our children or tell our loved ones, and making sure that we are working hard on ensuring that people are getting that early life education. And the reason why that matters so much is it's to do with cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve, you can just think of it being as like your brain's backup battery power. Our brains have multiple ways in which they can perform things. If your brain becomes burdened by dementia pathology, so as an example, if you end up with a lot of plaques in your brain, and your brain normally uses a pathway so that you can do a certain thing, maybe those plaques are interfering in that pathway. So what your brain does is it finds an alternative route. If you can do that, that means you've got cognitive reserve. So as an example, you could have person A and person B who both have the same amount of plaques in their brain. Person A had problems in early life. They didn't get a really good education. Their cognitive reserve is quite low. So they're both 65 years old. Person A starts showing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Person B had a really strong education. They built a really rich cognitive reserve. So even though they have the same plaques or amount of plaques as person A, their brain is able to find a different way to do the same tasks. So they're not showing any Alzheimer's symptoms. In fact, person A doesn't show any Alzheimer's symptoms until they're 80 because of their cognitive reserve, even though they had the same plaque burden as person A. So cognitive reserve is your brain's ability to find an alternative route to do a activity or perform a task. If you don't have that cognitive reserve, you are unable to perform that task, so you start showing symptoms earlier. In the midlife, we have hearing loss, high LDL cholesterol, depression, traumatic brain injury, physical inactivity, diabetes, smoking, hypertension, obesity, excessive alcohol, and then later life, we have social isolation, air pollution, and visual loss. Together, these count for 45% of dementia cases globally. Now, what that actually means then for us, particularly for those of us who are sitting in this midlife, is that there's so much that we can do right now. And that's really exciting. And I hope that you look at this and all you see is hope, because that's what it really should be, is that there is this real hope associated with this information. So the things that you can actually do, and this is really cool. We need to move more. That's really important. We know exercise is a strong lever. You need to protect your heart. Improving your cardiovascular health absolutely protects your brain health. So monitoring your blood pressure. Don't do it too regularly if you find that it's causing it to go up. So just check it every now and then. If you're noticing that it is high, please do a blood pressure diary where you take it morning and night and just get a bit of a feel for what your numbers are. If you get a really high read the first time you take your blood pressure, take it again about a minute later, and then take it again about a minute later, and then take an average of the second two reads. Ignore the first read and then take an average of the second two. Look at getting your hearing tested and your eyes checked. Get your eyes checked annually, getting your hearing checked as you need to. If you have hearing loss, wear your hearing aids. If you need to wear glasses, please make sure you do that. If there are problems with your eyes, please seek medical intervention to restore that. Sleep is something that you should absolutely be crazy about. I don't get invited to things at nighttime anymore. because I'm not interested. I'm so protective of my sleep. When my twins were born, I actually was living off about an hour of sleep a night, and that went on for quite a few months. And I ended up with postnatal depression and anxiety, and I never want to go back there. It was a very scary time for me. And now that I know about the impact, particularly on lack of sleep on brain health, and how when we're sleeping, the important role that the glymphatic system plays in terms of cleaning the brain, and that's happening while we're sleeping, I prioritize it. Some of the most important things you can do for your sleep is just, and it's so simple. Go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time. Do this every day. Doesn't matter if it's the weekend or not. When you wake up in the morning, go and get outside, get that sunlight on you. Make sure that you've got your circadian rhythm regular. Didn't really say that very well, but you want to have a regular circadian rhythm, and the way in which you can get into rhythm, bed at the same time, up at the same time, get that morning light. Another thing that's important in terms of helping your brain is staying mentally active. It's important to learn new skills. You need to do things that are actually really hard for you. It's so frustrating. Once things become simple for you, they're not cognitively demanding anymore, and they're not building your reserve. Things like music and language are complex, and they will continue to tax your brain. So we really encourage you to do those. Stay socially connected. Loneliness is absolutely a risk factor for not only for cardiovascular disease, but also for cognitive impairment. Now, when it comes to being socially connected, it's not just about being around people all the time. It's more about quality. So spending time with people so that you get your social connection, but not send so much so that you're then going, oh man, I got to go and hang out with people again, and you don't want to. That's not what it's about. It's about quality. So having enough connection so that you don't feel isolated and lonely. That's really the key. All right, so when it comes to exercise, there's a few things that are really important that are happening. So exercise increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I actually looked at this in my research, and I had the absolute blessing of being able to do assays where I was able to measure BDNF. Had a whole lot of problems with them, but it was such an exciting experience for me. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is really important in terms of your brain health. It promotes the building of new brain cells. It promotes the plasticity of where the neurons or the brain cells talk to each other. Does a lot of good things. Aerobic exercise has been shown to increase hippocampal volume. The hippocampus is one of the first regions affected in Alzheimer's, and it's a region associated with memory and learning, which is why oftentimes in Alzheimer's disease, we see people becoming more forgetful as a first sign. Vascular health, so when you do exercise, you get improved blood flow to the brain, and this is particularly important from a vascular dementia risk. And then exercise has anti-inflammatory effects. So we do know that chronic inflammation plays a role in many chronic conditions, but neuroinflammation is linked to dementia, and exercise is anti-inflammatory. So that's very cool. And that's weight training and aerobic training. So why does the midlife matter so much? What actually happens, particularly when we're looking at, say, Alzheimer's disease, is that changes are happening decades before you become symptomatic. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, by the time you're showing symptoms, you actually had changes to your brain occurring 15 to 20 years prior to that. And we start to see these amyloid and tau tangles beginning in your 40s and 50s. Your blood pressure starts to go up, you're stressed, you're not taking care of yourself, you're working too hard, you're not eating well, you're not exercising. It changes our brain vasculature. We see changes to our insulin levels. We see changes to our glucose, our cholesterol levels change. And this often happens in the midlife. So it is really important to, if you have not done it already, go and get a blood test, ask for your cholesterol profile, ask for your glucose, a fasting glucose, get your blood pressure checked, get the full checkup, find out where you're up to, and start making some of those changes now, because it is not an inevitability. It's not that this is what's going to happen, but this is what can happen if we don't start acting on it sooner. Preventative health is really hard in some ways, because We are trying to tell you about all the things that you should do so something doesn't happen. Preventative health can sometimes be hard to sell, but I think for anyone who has ever seen a dementia diagnosis, you're fairly motivated to not have that happen to you. And going for a walk and having a blood test and keeping an eye on your numbers probably doesn't sound like such a bad deal once you've seen dementia up close and personal. I've already talked about cognitive reserve, but here are some other ways in which you can improve your cognitive reserve or build it. It is something that you can do across a lifetime. We build a big cognitive reserve when we're younger, but it is something that we can continue to work on. So don't feel like if you didn't have that early educational attainment, that that's it for your cognitive reserve. That is just not how it works. We just have windows of opportunity, and we have multiple windows of opportunity. I do want to talk about nutrition really, really briefly. I'm not going to get into the supplements because if we're thinking about the things that improve your dementia risk, first and foremost, any dietary pattern that is calorie controlled, that has adequate protein, that is rich in vitamins and minerals, contains fiber, avoids the ultra processed food, that helps with glucose management. This is the diet that is going to help you age healthfully. Any diet that improves your cardiovascular health will also then improve your brain health. The Mediterranean diet has been looked at quite extensively for its health benefits, and it does have benefits on cardiovascular health, which would then lend to brain health as well. However, the best diet is the one that you can stick to. So, for example, in my situation, I don't adhere to any dietary pattern per se. I don't count calories, but there's a few things that I do. I have done intermittent fasting for a long time. I tend to not eat in the morning and then I eat later on in the day. When I'm doing training days, I will eat earlier in the day because if I try and do weight training after having fasted throughout the day, it's a miserable session and no one's happy. So it does depend on when I'm training. So if I train in the morning, then fasting is fine. If I'm training later in the day, I'll eat a little bit more throughout the day. It also depends, like if I'm hungry, I will just eat. I tend to not be hungry in the morning, so I just wait until I'm hungry and then I eat. I'm always paying attention to my protein, so I'm making sure that I am getting adequate protein throughout the day. I work off the rule of about 1.6 to 2 grams of kilo per body weight per day. That's for myself. I try and include veggies, fruit. I try and avoid a lot of ultra processed food, so we don't eat a lot of takeaway. I don't drink alcohol, or if I do, it's very, very rarely. I tend to not drink sugar outside of my smoothies that I make. I don't drink juice or soft drink. I do have Coke no sugar. I have one Coke no sugar a day. And then I have black coffee. So there are certain things that I do that help me control my calories, that I try and eat a variety of foods. So I try and eat a wide and varied diet, but I don't stick to any dietary pattern per se. Um, when it comes to food, there is not one single diet that has been shown to be able to prevent dementia. There is some evidence, mixed evidence that shows a Mediterranean diet might improve some cognitive outcomes, but I would say I wouldn't be looking at one specific diet to improve cognition. I would say that there are many diets with similar overlapping principles that can help you to live very healthfully, have a healthy cardiovascular system, and then consequently a healthy or have a healthy brain. Supplements is a whole other thing. I've got a whole separate webinar to do on that, so I don't want to go down that path. I will talk a little bit more about nutrition in that webinar, but if you've certainly got any questions about that, more than happy to have a chat. But it's really a mixed bag at the moment, and from a benefit perspective, adherence is key. Whatever you can stick to is what is going to work. Okay, so we are almost there. Summary, dementia risk is modifiable. You absolutely can modify it. And there are 14 modifiable risk factors that you can take action on. 13 modifiable risk factors that you can take action on. I don't think you can take action on the early life one, but you can certainly tell your family so that your children and grandchildren are able to do something about that. From a lever perspective, exercise is a powerful one. Anything that improves your cardiovascular health, so your blood pressure, your glucose, your cholesterol, that is absolutely going to have great upstream effects on your cognition. Sleep is your superpower. Please prioritize it. I don't even know how many people I have seen over the years who are just struggling with their health and their sleep is a mess. Really prioritize it. Become obsessive about, or not obsessive, but become really protective of your sleep. Get off your phones if you have to. Set yourself a sleep routine. Yes, it can be hard to get into, but it is so worthwhile. Social connection is important in the way that works for you. Cognitive engagement, definitely. We've got to be doing things that are cognitively stimulating, like genuinely difficult for us to do. And what we know from the research is that multi-domain interventions are more powerful than single domain interventions. And all that means is that exercise is great, nutrition is great, managing your stress is great, but when we combine those together, we get more effect, we get more benefit from it. Really importantly, having dementia risk factors does not guarantee dementia. Okay, remember the marbles. 86 blue, 14 pink. We can change the ratio of those by what we do, and what we want to try and do is lower the pink ones, and we can do that by all the things we've talked about tonight. In terms of that 45% of dementia risk factor being associated with modifiable risk factors, remember that's a population level statistic. We can't tell you how much we can lower your individual risk, but what we can do is we can work on those modifiable risk factors and be very comfortable knowing that we are absolutely significantly lowering our risk. There is no single supplement, no diet, no product, no protocol that prevents dementia. There are certainly things that can improve your cognitive outcome or improve your cognitive function, but that is absolutely different to the reversal of dementia or preventing it. We don't have that at the moment. Do I think that maybe one day we will? Don't know, but I certainly hope so. Developing dementia despite healthy habits is not a failure. Biology is complex. If we looked at my mum, she should never have got dementia. She was the healthiest person I know. But biology is complex. There are so many things at play. Remember, 45% of dementia risk is associated with modifiable risk factors. We have biology, we have genetics, we have environment. My mum grew up in a home with my grandfather who was a violent alcoholic, and she had a hugely traumatic childhood, and there was nothing she could do about that. She probably was genetically susceptible as well. You could still do all the right things post that, but unfortunately for my mum, I think that's actually what her trigger was and what set it off. Okay, so you guys are already a part of the Healthy Aging Project. As I've always said, absolutely, it is always free. I will always share with you the information that I have to the best of my knowledge. I am not the gatekeeper of knowledge. I will share with you what I know. If I don't know, I will always tell you that I don't know. I never want to give you a message of fear. I always want to try and empower you so that you can make good decisions for yourself and for your loved ones. Remind is my structured program. If you are interested in finding out more, that's my QR code that will take you to the Remind website, which has all the information about the program from here. If you have got any questions, please feel free to pop that into the comment section. It is 8:25 in Queensland. If you are joining us from other parts of Australia, I apologise if I've kept you up really late. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the comments section now. Or if you have something that you would like to ask me privately, you certainly can do that. You can email me right there. I was thinking, I thought I put my email on the slide. Yes, Naomi, it's in the bright pink writing. So you can email me at naomi@naomifistera.com. Conversely, you can also shoot me a message on social media. I've got people messaging me there regularly. Something else to consider is that we now have the walking groups, the connection groups, the community groups that are now set up on WhatsApp. If you would like to join those, there is a post in the Facebook group about the program, the groups, so you can meet up with people in your local area, and just it's really nice to meet people who are like-minded. So if you'd like some more information on that, let me know. Otherwise, that is me for the night. I don't think there's any questions that I.
The question there, Naomi, someone's asked.
Oh, really? Where? Okay, hang on. I cannot see my chat box anymore. Where did that disappear
Interested in understanding more about the estrogen dementia relationship or association. A question from Kay.
Yeah, that is actually a whole webinar in and of itself. And I've actually been thinking about it a little bit, the whole menopause topic. I think it does need to be its own separate thing. It's such a big topic. It's also something that is very, very new, and I wouldn't be doing it justice to try and comment on it without having done a little bit more reading on it first, because it's ever changing. Hang on, I've got a. Oh, hang on. Oops, there's a few comments in here. Sorry, everyone. I will cover estrogen dementia at another point. Oh, you're welcome, everyone. Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Webinar on supplements. That will be coming up in the next probably fortnight. I will need to go and put it together. And then I have a message also. Lisa Mosconi. Yes, yes, yes. Sorry, I'm just reading a comment. Yeah. So there is a researcher, and that's why I don't want to really comment on it at the moment, because it's such an emerging area. But there's a lady called, she's a researcher, Lisa Mosconi, and she's just done this incredible neuroimaging. So her surname is Mosconi, Mosconi. She is absolutely worth a follow. She's a smart lady. But they've done these imaging studies of the brain, and it's insane what they have found. I haven't looked at it. She released this, I want to say last year, I believe. So I want to go back and have a look at it before I um, say anything about it, because there's been a bit of time since I last looked at it. But she did suggest that lifespan, and this is what this comment is saying, that lifespan alone is not enough to account for the differences in Alzheimer's disease diagnosis between males and females. So once upon a time, it was just women live longer. That's why you get more Alzheimer's disease. And it's really frustrating, because unfortunately, when it comes to women, that tends to be the thing. It's like, yeah, that's what we think it is. Off you go. And they don't tend to research it as much. And now we've got some really great research being done on menopause and women and women's health. And it's really exciting, but it's coming out so quickly. If you're not living in the world, you obviously are going to miss some things. I will find this. So the interview is between Lisa Mosconi and Peter Attia. I have absolutely, I will refuse to have anything to do with Peter Attia anymore, because of his association with, what's his name? Warren, you're laughing. You know who I mean. What's his name? The sex trafficker in America. Oh, what's his name? That really famous. I can't think of his name. Anyway, um, Peter Attia got caught being involved with him. And so I am not interested in anything to do with Peter Attia. So I will try and find Lisa Mosconi's. I will find her research. I'll share it into the Facebook group so you can all have a read of it, because it's fabulous. She's amazing. She's a pioneer. And I think that would be really fantastic.
Comment says Epstein.
That's the one, Epstein. Peter Attia was involved in Epstein, and some of his comments are utterly vile. So not interested. But Lisa Mosconi, awesome. Oh yes, yes. Oh, Andrew Tate. It could have been Tate. Oh, thank you, everyone. All right, I will let you go. If you do have any questions, please let me know. Email me, message me. If you've got any more topics that you would like me to cover, please tell me. Happy to run these as regularly as I can. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you walk away from this feeling a little relieved. Hopefully, for some of you who are worried about whether or not you're going to get dementia, that maybe now you feel a little less worried about it, particularly if you think about your blue balls and pink ball marbles, not balls, marbles. Oh dear. All right. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you all on the Healthy Aging Project. Bye.